listening to the Labor Notes podcast, a weekly show from Labor Notes on rank-and-file news and organizing strategies. I'm pod co-host Natasha Elena Yulman.
And I'm your other pod co-host, Danielle Smith. Today we're talking about labor and immigration. Immigrant workers and students are on the front line of this administration's mass deportation agenda, frequently enforced by plainclothes agents from ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which has an MO of violently ripping people away from their family members and hauling them into detention centers hundreds of miles away with no accountability or due process.
As we record this episode, union members and organizers arrested and still detained include farm worker union leader Alfredo Lelo Juarez, Smart Local 100 member and sheet metal worker Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, United Auto Workers Local 2710 member Mahmoud Khalil, SEIU Local 925 member Llewellyn Dixon, and Tufts graduate student and SEIU Local 509 member Rumeza Ozturk. In the case of Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, the administration targeted him and deported him to El Salvador despite a federal court order protecting him, and a unanimous Supreme Court ruling this month directing the Trump administration to work on returning him home. While the Trump administration acknowledges it made an error, they appear to be testing the limits of the Supreme Court's ruling, stating that they're unable to bring him back.
These arrests show an administration using state violence and terror in attempts to deepen divisions by further scapegoating immigrants and to damage organizing and squash political speech. Only in February, Alfredo Lelo Juarez had led a farm worker action at the state capitol in Washington, and Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeza Ozturk were arrested after they advocated at their respective college campuses last year for solidarity with Palestinian people.
These attacks on immigrants, who both parties have treated like political pawns, are fundamental affronts to human dignity and safety, and they undermine our strength as workers. Whether you're a citizen or not, however you feel about immigration, as working people, we all have stakes in this fight. There's this common notion that immigrants drive down wages, but that argument misses something important. The boss can only pay this worker less because of their immigration status, because of that vulnerability that hangs over these workers' heads and forces them to settle for less. And that's bad for all of us. And there's no question that bosses are taking advantage of the vulnerability in this moment. Savannah Palmyra, Director of Organizing at the Painters and Allied Trades District Council 5, told me that unscrupulous bosses have been telling workers that they aren't owed overtime because of their immigration status, which isn't true. Many workers are also hearing that they're not allowed to join a union, which, again, just dilutes our own bargaining power. And hearing stuff like this, it just becomes so clear that this sort of division only serves the boss. It's not the immigrant worker saying, please pay me less. It's the boss choosing to take advantage of a person in a vulnerable position and hoping you'll be too mad at the immigrant to get mad at him.
Exactly. This divide and conquer stuff is right out of the boss's playbook. Also, an immigration discourse framed as a law enforcement issue has never boded well for freedom of movement, association, and political expression for anyone. You know, the things the establishment elite used to at least pay lip service to as values central to the social contract of American life. But it's important to look at some of the people actually fighting back today who have been for a while. Union members, many of whom have long seen these tactics of division for what they are. Cynical efforts by the ruling class to blame the most vulnerable among us and to create the kind of chaos, fear, and distraction that keeps us disorganized.
These workers know that targeting immigrant workers as a matter of official policy and enforcement is a form of social control that only helps bosses looking to undercut all of their employees, whether or not they're citizens. Workers, unions, and community groups have been organizing rallies in strategic defense of its immigrant members well before the election. And last week, we saw an important new development. 10 national unions, including the National Nurses United, SEIU, and UAW, and dozens of locals representing more than 3 million members, issued a joint statement demanding the release of immigrant workers recently detained by ICE.
It was a show of leadership on the message we need to be sending about these unconscionable kidnappings, which have nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with punishing and terrorizing workers for political reasons, and to advance a campaign of repression that will come for everyone.
Right. These unions recognize that this administration is testing the extent of its powers right now. The unions also called on employers, university administrators, and local governments to refuse to cooperate, and asked our elected officials to, and I quote, find their spines. Here's how Carl Rosen, president of the United Electrical Workers, framed the stakes. He said, when a segment of the population is first targeted, it's not going to stop there. Eventually, it's going to be used against the labor movement and any Americans who want to stand up for justice. So we were happy to join together with other unions in saying, we are going to resist this.
Natasha, I wanted to go back to what you were saying earlier about the workers who've been organizing for a while now to defend immigrant coworkers. You and Sarah Lazar jointly reported a couple pieces earlier this year about some of the groundwork these folks have been building. What did you guys hear?
Yeah, so unions and other groups have been mobilizing to protect workers from ICE and internal workplace audits, which bosses often use to retaliate against workers looking to organize. The Painters and Allied Trades District Council 5, which I mentioned earlier, is offering legal assistance to immigrant members and conducting political education workshops to address misconceptions like that immigrant workers can't be in unions or get union protections. Community groups and worker centers have also been mobilizing against this administration's deportation machine. Escucha Mi Voz, a faith-based community group based in Iowa, has been accompanying immigrants to their ICE check-ins to signal, this is a beloved member of our community, and we're watching. And they've found that act of accompaniment has a very real impact.
I actually thought that was such a powerful detail in that piece. That kind of action speaks to how much it matters, even just to be there physically, standing in solidarity with someone. How are groups like that ramping up their organizing or thinking about their strategy this time around?
Well, Escucha Mi Voz also committed to something that I think is really important. They plan to have 6,000 one-on-one conversations within their communities, and something I thought was really cool, the way they talk about it really sounds like an organizing campaign, face-to-face one-on-ones about immigration, meeting folks where they're at, but, engaging with people who don't agree with us in good faith, and over time bringing them closer into the movement.
You also include an example in the piece of the Chicago Teachers Union as a sort of sanctuary union, or at least having some of those protections. How did that come together?
Yeah, so in 2019, they won language saying you don't have to let ICE in the door unless they have a signed warrant, which they basically never do. But a CTU member made a really important point as we were talking about it. She said, you can win all the best contract language in the world, but if you and everyone else don't know your contract, someone's still got to be the person to tell ICE, no, you can't come in. So making sure you and everyone you know are informed about what you've already won is also just as essential.
There have also been a number of Teamster locals in New York that said years ago in 2017, when Trump took office in his first term, that they're going to be a sanctuary union that defends immigrant members and their families. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, the Teamsters Joint Council 16, which includes 27 Teamsters locals in the New York metropolitan area, announced that it was a sanctuary union, and that meant that the locals pledged not to work with federal agents in prosecuting or deporting members, and to fight for contract language that would protect their members. The National Union of Healthcare Workers also passed a similar resolution in 2017, pledging that the union will not voluntarily cooperate with federal agents to enforce immigration laws, and they have recently sort of recommitted to that pledge.
You can read more about these examples in a piece we ran in January titled, How Labor Can Fight Back Against Trump's Mass Deportation Agenda. Natasha and Sarah Lazar co-wrote it as a joint project of Labor Notes and Workday magazine. In an accompanying piece, they also put together some useful contract language from other unions and labor activists. What are some of the things workers have won?
Yeah, so I sort of touched on this earlier, but one big thing is that workers can win contract language guarding against unnecessary employment verification audits, which bosses can sometimes weaponize against workers when they catch wind of an organizing campaign. United Electrical Workers Local 115 members won language saying that the company must give the union 4 months' notice before conducting an audit, and that if a worker doesn't have their documentation, they're entitled to 4.5 months of unpaid leave. If they can produce the required documentation during that time, they can return to work, but even after that time period has elapsed, they're still eligible for rehire with full seniority for another 20 months while they work to secure that documentation. SEIU Local 26 janitors in the Twin Cities recently negotiated a contract that requires employers to disclose in writing any inquiries into workers' documentation and protects workers' jobs for up to 120 days with full seniority while any issue is addressed. Then there's also privacy language, saying that the employer can't divulge personal immigration status information to any parties except as required by law, and language that commits the company to offering support in extending a worker's work authorization, renewing their visa, or applying for a new immigration status as necessary. So Sarah Lazar and I compiled sort of the best contract language that we found across a variety of issues pertaining to immigrant members. So if you're looking for provisions to fight for in your next contract, you can use them as a jumping off point. And you can find those on the Labor Notes and Workday magazine sites.
What are workers doing right now to support those being detained?
Yeah, so when Alfredo Lelo Juarez, the 25-year-old farm worker organizer, was detained last month in Washington state, members of Familias Unidas por la Justicia, the independent union he helped form as a young teenager, rushed into action. They joined up with UFCW Local 3000 members in the state and went to protest at the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, Washington, where both Juarez and another worker, SEIU Local 925 member Llewellyn Dixon, are being held. Faye Gunther, president of the UFCW Local 3000, said that they'll keep showing up to worker-led actions as long as it takes. And then, just earlier this month, members of the sheet metal, air, rail, and transportation workers, which is part of the union that 29-year-old sheet metal apprentice Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia is a part of, held a rally in Maryland where Kilmar had lived with his family before ICE agents abducted him and shipped him off to El Salvador with zero due process. Even though a judge in 2019 had issued an order prohibiting exactly that. The administration has called this a mistake, though they haven't brought him back and say they don't have to. While his union siblings rally for his return, the federal courts, including a unanimous Supreme Court, have backed up that call. But as we mentioned earlier, the Trump Department of Justice is now claiming it's out of its hands and jurisdiction now that he's in El Salvador. Court rulings be damned. The rulings matter, but it also shows that you can't take for granted that a legal decision is the final word. The way workers fight and mobilize right now will determine what exactly we can win.
Speaking of mobilizing members, another way this administration is targeting immigrant workers is by ending certain programs meant to support certain groups of workers. Our coworker Luis Feliz Leon reported that the Trump administration is trying to roll back the humanitarian parole program, which the U.S. government was using until now to provide visas to people fleeing war or political instability in certain countries. Unions in Kentucky are rallying to defend 200 union workers who assemble dishwashers, refrigerators, washers, and dryers for GE Appliances Haier at Appliance Park in Louisville, Kentucky, who got notice this month that the administration is now revoking their work authorizations. These workers are from Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Venezuela, and members of the Communication Workers Industrial Division, IUE CWA Local 83761. Cassie Lyles, who teaches civics to high schoolers in Louisville near Appliance Park, said this: "I think the best thing we can do is stick together, because it's not just going to affect people at the Appliance Park. This is going to affect workers in every union. These are our neighbors. These are kids who are in my building. So we want to make sure that we stand strong."
That's absolutely true. I want to end with something that Jeffrey Hermanson, director of the International Union Educational League, wrote for us recently in a piece about tariffs that I thought framed the problem and the solution clearly for labor right now. Here's what he wrote. In the long run, supporting Trump's tariffs and deportations is a counterproductive stance for U.S. labor. By doing so, a union risks being perceived as allying with the most reactionary sectors of capital in an attack on Mexican workers in the U.S. and in Mexico. Only by balancing trade policy advocacy with a strong program of concrete international solidarity and support for undocumented workers in the U.S. can we live up to the labor slogan of "an injury to one is an injury to all." We should not ignore the interests of our Mexican brothers and sisters, who are toiling for the same corporate bosses at 1/10 of the wages, nor should we underestimate their potential power. Mexican workers have successfully taken on General Motors, Volkswagen, and Audi in recent organizing campaigns and contract strikes. A cross-border, working-class alliance with efforts like these is the only way we will ever build the power to confront these corporations, corral them, and together determine investment and employment decisions.
It's undeniable that these are scary times, but it's nice to hear in these examples that we aren't alone and can find ways to fight back through our fear together. Thanks, Natasha. It's always great to be here with you. And that's our show for today. Labor Notes is proud to be a part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Visit laborradionetwork.org to check out shows on the network.
We've also got a bunch of online workshops coming up in the second half of April, including a stewards workshop next week on dealing with difficult supervisors, and the Steering Green Transitions workshop on how to build power with coworkers on climate issues and technology.
We've also got a new 2-part series on building a strong contract campaign on Wednesdays, April 30th and May 7th. You can sign up at labornotes.org/events, where you can also check out some of our in-person events coming up in Colorado Springs, in Portland, Oregon, and New Orleans.
Please consider rating us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, download our episode. The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Danielle Smith, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by Labor Notes labor climate organizer Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, all.